Hello and welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable, brought to you by Gestalt IT. My name is Rich Straffolino, and I will be your intrepid host for this podcast. Ordinarily, we like to have a little fun. We like to talk about a single premise while we're on a premises. This time we're meeting with our esteemed panel in cyberspace, so I guess that's still location, at least until net neutrality is taken away and it becomes Verizon's proprietary Netscape navigation system or something like that, but that's a tangent for another time. No, this week we are meeting to discuss kind of a look back and discuss what 2017 was all about. That's right, today we're going to be discussing 2017 was the year of blank. Joining us on today's panel, we have Tom Hollingsworth, aka the Networking Nerd. Tom, how are you?
I'm great, Rich. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I've had caffeine and I'm ready to go. We also have on the cyberspace today Matt Lieb. Matt, how are you?
Hi, Rich. I'm fine, thanks.
And we have from across the pond, but not across from our hearts, Ian Sanderson. Ian, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much, Rich. How are you?
I'm so enthusiastic. I'm really excited. I haven't checked with anybody to see kind of what their answers were. I'm hoping we all have maybe different takes, or maybe there's going to be a universal theme. I hope it's pessimism. So let's get into it. Let's start out with you, Tom. Tom, what was 2017 the year of for you?
Well, I feel like 2017 was the year that SD-WAN grew up. For those of you who are not familiar, SD-WAN is kind of the way that modern people are taking software-defined networking and applying it to an old problem that we had, which is WAN networking sucks and nobody likes to do it. And so we've heard rumblings of the last couple of years, that SD-WAN is this thing that's happening and people are really excited about it. And we've seen a lot of companies spring up around that. Well, in 2017, they all kind of grew up and moved out of the house. And most of them seemed to move into a different house. So we had Viptela, which was a large, well-known company, get bought by Cisco. We had VeloCloud get bought by VMware. We've had other companies like Silver Peak and Archaea and a bunch of other ones doing a really good job of making tons and tons of money. And I think that we've reached the point where nobody wants to talk about it anymore. It's just a thing that happens. And that's how I know that we've reached the point where it's grown up, is everybody's bored by it.
Tom, that's really interesting because my thought on, I'd kind of considered that in the same vein for my selection. For me, my thought was that we realized that SD-WAN is a feature, not necessarily a product, or at least that's kind of the prevailing wisdom, I think, for a lot of these companies. Is that kind of along the same veins of growing up?
Well, it kind of is. The problem you run into when you start getting into that feature product discussion is, would I ever go out and buy SD-WAN? Versus would I go out and buy a product that features it? And the discussion that we've always had around feature versus product is, could this stand alone? And the answer, believe it or not, is we found a report that came out about a month and a half ago. It was right around the time that VeloCloud's purchase was being talked about. We have all these products that have these feature sets involved in them, whether they be Riverbed or Silver Peak or a lot of other companies. But believe it or not, the companies that were making all the money were the ones that did nothing but sell SD-WAN. So I would say it's not necessarily just a feature. I think it's a product that can be integrated to do feature sets from other things, but this is a very real thing that people are going to buy. The question is, are they still going to want to buy it from the friendly neighborhood networking vendor, the VMwares and the Ciscos?
Yeah, and I think by kind of in the growing up discussion, it's also that it seems like we've largely settled down on what SD-WAN means in a way that even something like, which is remarkable, considering it's such a hot term and such a marketing term, that, even when it's applied to enterprises or maybe service providers or differing audience, there's, I think, a level set of expectations that we haven't even seen, even from something like HCI or something like that, where I still feel like that's been subsumed by marketing and now can mean anything that anyone wants. I kind of agree that there's a maturity to SD-WAN in that there's a rough idea of what that actually means now.
True. Now, let me just put out this warning right now. If anyone's listening to this podcast, if you're going to try to make 2018 the year of HCI SD-WAN, I will find you, and I have a very particular set of skills.
No, that's the year of 2017, surely. That's the year of 2017.
All right, so let's move on. Ian, I'm really curious to hear what is your, 2017 is the year of?
Well, you've already touched on it. I was going to say HCI, so that's the road I'm going down. It's the year of HCI for me. So I'm more of an infrastructure guy, networking kind of guy. I will not pretend to know anything about SD-WAN other than what it stands for, which is why I didn't jump in on that conversation. But HCI. So you said HCI. It's kind of lost in translation, but it in general it's a convergence of systems of some description. Various companies have their own interpretation of that, and NetApp released their offering this year. SimpliVity was bought by HPE. vSAN, which makes up part of VMware's sort of HCI offering, that's going from strength to strength. And Nutanix as well, which many say is kind of the leader in the HCI space. The company I work for, on sort of hardware refreshes, we've been moving away from the older cookie cutter, 3 hosts and a SAN type of model for VMware, and more into the HCI space. It's more cost effective and it delivers better value for money.
Yeah, I mean, the HCI space is really interesting. And the reason, I say that is because we're already seeing people trying to double down. HCI is already a more refined, it's kind of adding the networking component, right, from a converged infrastructure kind of take on that. We're already seeing people trying to get to hyper converged and trying to differentiate. We have Datrium does true convergence, and that which is actually a divergence of some of the HCI stuff. But in terms of I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what is the major innovation? Is it being able to easily provision? Is it being able to kind of see everything in the same, manage everything from the same UI? Is it simply, simplifying that inverted pyramid of virtualization that we've all kind of gotten used to? I'm just kind of curious, why it's so important and so vital for the modern enterprise.
Well, honestly, one of the sort of the driving factors is the cost. The example I gave there on the hardware refresh, 9 times out of 10, it's worked out cheaper to replace that tin with some kind of HCI infrastructure rather than separate host, separate SAN, maybe dedicated top of rack switching. It's been cheaper to do that, but yeah, the management layer over the top of that as well. I mean, that's great. So if I use Nutanix example again, their Prism interface makes it really simple to provision storage, replicate storage to other nodes, etc. I guess it converges roles as well. You don't have necessarily the SAN team anymore. You just have the HCI team. Maybe it's just a new role.
Yeah, on the channel side, because I work for a reseller, we find that a lot of customers are moving to HCI because it's a far more manageable, far more cookie cutter type of environment. But certainly, we've always seen, ever since the introduction of these kinds of products, deployment out in the field. But what I'm starting to see is more of a larger HCI type of clusters being implemented also in the home offices, whereas in the old days, a year or two ago, these hyper converged node based environments were great for remote offices and remote management. Today, it's less of a hub and spoke and more of an overall architecture that I'm seeing implemented. We're in generation 2 of these devices. They've matured a lot since the beginning. And I think that it's sort of a massive shift in the product lines. We've also seen a bunch of other players jump into the fray. Brands like Pivot 3 comes to mind. Datrium is another one. And these brands have something special to bring from their own particular perspective. Pivot 3, for example, grew out of video surveillance architectures with a VMware background. And I find that very interesting because it was a well-designed architecture for a very different use case in the beginning. But, interestingly, I still find the naming convention, just like SD-WAN from a naming convention, really kind of irks me. Hyperconverged, in my mind, is supposed to mean hypervisor converged, right? Not a bunch of pieces put together for a unique use case, but a hypervisor-based utility put together for a specific virtualization use case. Do you guys see that?
Well, Matt, just from my briefings that I've had, I have heard, I have heard some calls of companies trying to differentiate on the fact that, there's more of a hardware agnostic element to them as opposed to something like a Nutanix where, you're buying, Nutanix hardware, and Datrium's kind of making that argument as well. Even though they'll sell you a box, you can technically run it on, theoretically on what you have in your data center. So, I think I think that's more of a differentiator for companies when they're trying to come in against some of the major incumbents.
Oh, I can appreciate that. What I'm talking about more to the point is, and no disrespect to these products, but these copy data management solutions that are being referred to as hyper-converged as well. There's no hypervisor on that. I mean, they're great products, the Rubrics and the Cohesities of the world, fantastic products, and do what they're supposed to do fabulously. What they don't do is answer the question, to me, why is that hyper-converged?
I guess the play that Rubric has, at least in my mind, is, hey, look, it's a 2U box with 3 or 4 sleds in it. It's converged, but it's still 4 servers in a box at the end of the day.
Again, I can accept that. It is converged.
Yeah, but it's not hyper converged.
Well, if I can jump in here, I know exactly where to lay the blame for this whole problem.
The marketers.
You beat me to it. One specific marketer, Nutanix, and here's the reason why. And this is a problem we've seen across all markets this year. X is all you need to be successful in the world. Just buy X, and X could be anything: SDN, hyperconverged, electric cars, what have you. The problem is when you have traditional IT, traditional vendor companies that are faced with that marketing message. Guess what they do? Well, hey, look at our thing. Our thing is X as well. We've always done X.
Defined, didn't we?
Yeah. Well, and what happened when that happened? Now everything becomes the thing that is selling. So yeah, if hyperconverged is selling like hotcakes, and your system even vaguely resembles it, guess what? It's now hyperconverged, and you totally need to buy it. Well, can I do this with it? That's not important right now. You still need to buy this.
Right. Irrelevant. Exactly.
Yeah, Tom, I've had a number of briefings, and I don't want to call anybody out specifically, but with companies that, you're basically a software-defined storage company, but you cleaned up your UI, so now all of a sudden you're an HCI company because reasons is like definitely a trend going on.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. I bristle at useless marketing. And it's not disrespect. I understand the point. Jump on that bandwagon, call yourself whatever the heck you want to call yourself. But it really is nice when, to quote an old Tech Field Day visit we had with a vendor a while back, words do mean things.
Yeah, and I think where companies get in trouble is, and for a lot of these older, not even older companies, but companies that have had a product line for a while that has, maybe a feature set vaguely in line with HCI. I do think there is the, hey, we were doing this before it was cool, and now all of a sudden there's kind of a rush to rebrand and maybe try and capture some mind share because you're using the hot new term.
Exactly.
So Matt, kind of going into that, do you have a hopefully a trend that has less marketing hype with it than HCI for your 2017 year of?
Well, so I've had a couple thoughts on this one, and Rich, you opened it up by saying hopefully pessimistic. I'm not sure if that's really what you meant, but from a pessimistic point of view, this whole ruling on net neutrality is. I think going to, if it ends up truly going through, and I think that's sort of up in the air right now, it's going to change the entire landscape for the average end user, the average corporation, unless you are able to pay the big bucks. I think the whole doing away with a net neutrality approach can't be ignored as a potential trend this year.
Well, as Matt, I'm specifically interested in, how do you see it shaking out for on the enterprise side? Like, what are the impacts of that? Because I think everyone is the consumer side of that has a lot of awareness to it, certainly. Mm-hmm. There's no end to hyperbolic Facebook posts about it, whether devoid of fact or not. But I completely agree with you that it is a major decision and kind of ends 2017 on a little bit of a depressing note in the U.S. at least. In terms of specifically business, enterprise, and maybe even a cloud perspective, how do you see this having an impact?
Well, I recently did a somewhat deep dive into what is probably the largest single cost line item on an enterprise's budget, and that's licensing and support. I think we're going to add another one to it. If a company wants to get the kind of transfer rates that they need to do things like communicate with remote offices, communicate with the outside world, do replication across the wire, all of that, I think is going to ultimately just cost a whole lot more. And certainly, all it's going to really do is make a lot of money for the providers of this bandwidth. And I think the rest of us who are smaller organizations and individuals, we're going to find that in order to offset, what has been an overarching growing demand for bandwidth, we're just going to find ourselves paying more as well. Well, where does that money go to? Are they talking about building up a greater infrastructure? Is this going to be a scalable thing? I have no idea, because we really don't know what the net result is going to be, the end of this whole argument. But if it does go through, I think ultimately that there's going to be some winners, and those winners are the content and transfer providers, and there's going to be a lot of losers, and that's everybody who uses that content and transfer.
Tom, I'm interested in your perspective on this. We've had some discussions on the Gestalt IT rundown, kind of in regards to this. We discussed this briefly, but from a business perspective, how do you see this decision playing out?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of what we've been hearing is very focused on the consumer market. I'm going to have to pay extra for Netflix. I'm going to have to pay to post on Twitter, and I don't really think that that's going to be the way that things go. We've seen, believe it or not, in 2017, we've seen the power that a group of users can have when they push back against bad decisions. Look at the Patreon thing that just came up a couple of weeks ago. Patreon wanted to raise their rates because, well, hey, Patreon wants to make money, and they had users leaving in droves. Now it's a little different because you can't exactly switch your ISP, but you can definitely get enough people to push back and say, okay, we're not going to put up with this crap. The people that really have a hard time with this are the ones that are in the middle, the Netflix of the world. I don't think that Verizon wants to screw you or me. I mean, relatively speaking, they would still love to get as much of our money as possible. What they want to do is they want to make Netflix pay. It's like, oh, hey, Netflix is pumping how much traffic through my network and they're not paying any more than anybody else would? Oh, we are not going to tolerate that crap anymore. And they've done it before. They've done it before the rules were enshrined. So I think what we're going to see is a two-tier problem. We're going to see businesses like Matt alluded to, the businesses that are heavy consumers of bandwidth, video chat services, telemedicine, Netflix, those kinds of companies are going to get absolutely blasted with charges if this goes through. Now, what are they going to do? They're not going to take it laying down, but they can't really push back against the ISPs, so they're going to pass all that along to customers. Oh, we're raising your rates $5 a month from here on out because it's the only way that we're going to be able to stay in business because we're just getting gouged by the ISPs. And what happens is consumers get pissed at the ISPs, not realizing that this is not even a fight between them, that this is a fight between the middleman and the provider. And they're just getting dragged in because they're the source of income. And so we're going to have these, I hope this doesn't come to pass, but we're basically going to have this three-way war between people paying for content, claiming they're being overcharged, providers being claimed that they're overcharged from the ISPs and having to pass the cost along, and the ISPs sitting there with their hands in the air going, hey, we're just trying to make everything fair while we sit here on our mountain of cash and swim through it.
So, Ian, I'm really curious on your perspective on this coming from the UK. How does this just sound like crazy town to you, or like how does this discussion play in the UK?
To be honest, I haven't really been that involved with the net neutrality thing. I see a lot of people getting quite angry about it on Twitter, but I haven't looked that much into it, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Well, and that kind of states that because it's not, it's not a policy conversation that the UK, deems worthy of having, whereas, it's increasingly becoming a partisan issue in the U.S. I do think it might signal, like Tom and Matt, you were saying, there are a lot of stakeholders between the consumer and the ISP that would potentially object to this, as well as being massively unpopular just with consumers in general. And so, I think we've kind of reached the point now where we see that, from the FCC or FTC perspective, maybe we've reached the end of where a regulatory agency directly has control over that. And this becomes a legislative issue, which I'm sure no one really wants because, legislature in the U.S. is slow to arguably broken, depending on who you ask. So I'm interested to see if the massive consumer unpopularity and powerful stakeholders, Netflix is not the size of a Time Warner or whatever, but there's still a huge company, and there's still a lot of companies that would be impacted by these new rules that have a lot of money to lobby. So I'm interested to see, as this moves into a legislative process, how that all shakes out.
Yeah, me too.
All right, and so I think I'll just end the show real quick. I didn't have, like I said, Tom, for my 2017 is the year of blank. I thought about SD-WAN, but I ended up going with, this is kind of the year that, at least from what I've seen, 2017 will be remembered as the year when data management became kind of front and center in terms of a lot of conversations that I'm hearing. And what I mean by that is, I've been hearing the Keith Townsend has been beating the drum that data is the new oil. I see that post like every other day from him, and I completely agree with him. And you can see this in that a lot of old storage companies, whether they're in backup or DR or whatever, all of a sudden are now data management companies. That is the new hotness, and I think that's partly marketing and what we were talking about of, hey, we want to be part of this cool new trend. But I think it's also the fact that, we're seeing that being increasingly important. I think that's a lot of the reason we're seeing, hybrid cloud being more of a thing, because some people want, need, or must have something in a local data center. They need to have some kind of control over data that's not just being punted up to a data center in the cloud. And that was kind of my takeaway from 2017.
The only thing that worries me about that takeaway is, if data really is the new oil, who's the new J.R. Ewing of data? And for those of you who didn't get that reference, go to Wikipedia and look up Dallas and who shot JR. Now, I know that there are probably some of you on this call that probably weren't even born when that came out. But the idea that there could be someone that could kind of run that could really control the flow of data, because it's funny that no one wants to own the data when it gets exposed. When my credit card number somehow gets magically popped out of a Target POS system, all of a sudden we can't figure out who owns the data. But when it comes time for people to start taking stock of, this much data means we have power over X. Oh, hey, look, I'm the owner of that data. And I'm just a little worried that we're basically creating nuclear weapons. So if data really is the new oil and it's the new way we're going to do economy, if it's just going to sit around until someone decides to use it, it's kind of useless, but it has the power to be way, way too powerful in our lives.
Yeah, and I've actually been thinking about that metaphor, and obviously it's just a way to frame the discussion. We don't have to CinemaSins it and assume it has to be literal. But I actually I've started to think of data as the kind of an equivalent to solar energy, actually, where we're just now starting to realize we need to utilize it more efficiently. We've had solar, for decades, but it's been extremely inefficient, and it hasn't been maybe all that practical to harness it. Whereas, now it is increasingly, there's more of an emphasis on getting the most out of what you're putting in for a little bit. So I'm still teasing that out, and that might be a blog post on Gestalt IT at some point. But that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I certainly see that data has intrinsic value, and I definitely agree that in the enterprise space particularly, a lot of organizations have no idea to leverage the power, or how to leverage the power of their data. It's a big part of what I do on a daily basis, and I think that we're going to probably see tools in and around the management of that data that grow in their capabilities. The Splunks of the world. These are softwares that are designed to take advantage of and present to the user. Not take advantage of the user. That didn't sound right. But present to the user in a functional way the particular parameters they may be seeking, and I think that there's value to that. But when you get to a more global perspective, the quote unquote who owns the data from a cloud and overarching perspective, it becomes a real muddy conversation. And really worthwhile.
Yeah, I've got a slightly different take on this as well. So we're seeing this from a presentation Activio gave at Tech Field Day, and some of the backup vendors as well. Is you have a lot of this cold data sat doing nothing when it's in backup form, and it's how do you then leverage that and put that data to work and drive some value from that as well. So Actifio was the idea of being able to present databases from backups that were stored on object-based storage and public cloud, for example. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and we've even seen Microsoft with some of their blob storage kind of adding in some capabilities to get that even when data is cold, there's still a significant percentage of that needs to get touched and can have some value to it. and they're kind of putting in hooks into Azure Blob Storage to let people kind of to play with that a little bit. We've seen, I think, I saw a quick thing from like a company, Archive 360, that was building off some analytics based on that. So yeah, I completely agree that that's a really interesting avenue for that as well. All right. Well, I think that just about brings us to the end. I think from our takeaways is that 2017 was filled with marketing bluster and, interesting changes to the data center, and also some abject depression, from Matt. So thank you for that. So let's go around the table. Ian, where can people, hear more from you and see some of your writing and check you out?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. Really embarrassing Twitter handle of Ian0x0R. That's when I thought I was elite way back in the day. So IanOxO, or you can find my blog at www.snurf.co.uk, which after I registered the domain, I found out it was a legal high. So if you search for drugs, you find my blog.
All right, Matt, where can people hear from you?
So Twitter is always the best way to reach me. I'm at MBLEIB. And as Chris Evans said, my blog is probably the longest single word name out there. It's virtually tied to my desktop.com.
That would, make a good password if it wasn't like a cogent thought as well, Matt.
Exactly.
All right, and Tom. Yes, Matt?
I said there's no special characters.
Yeah, we'll get some of that leet speak from Ian's Twitter handle, and we'll put that in there to mix it up.
I have to do that.
And Tom, where can people find you?
Well, if you want to read my crazy thoughts, you can always go to networkingnerd.net. I publish my original work there. I also publish some great stuff on our sister site at gestaltit.com. Sometimes that's original pieces. Sometimes that's original ramblings. And then if you want to catch the freshest ramblings, you can head over to my Twitter handle, which is at networkingnerd. But I need to warn you, snark abounds.
I can verify that. And if you want to hear more from me, it's at Mr. Anthropology, MR Anthropology on Twitter. And I'm writing at Gestalt IT as well, as you probably know if you're listening to this. And if you haven't already subscribed, rate and review the On-Premise IT Roundtable. Really helps us out, gets us up in the ratings, and gets us a little more visibility. And if you ever have a topic that you want us to cover on here, shoot it to me on Twitter, like I said, at Mr. Anthropology. We'll be back. I think we'll have one more show in 2017, and then we'll be on for a fresh batch of episodes of new premises and premises. Sure, why not? In 2018. So thanks for listening. Take care, everybody, and have a super sparkly day.